start my story with my journey to becoming an occupational therapist. As a teenager, 14, 15, 16, I was reading everything I could get my hands on, mostly off my parents' bookshelf. And I loved art and science and philosophy and psychology. So I would read these things, and then I would have these long, intense conversations with my parents. And really what I was trying to do is kind of discover who I was and who are the people around me. Like, how do human beings work? What makes people behave as they do? And what inspires them and motivates them? And so I was looking for all of this in my reading and my discussions. And when I came upon occupational therapy, as I was investigating what I would do when I went to college, I thought, oh, this is for me, because I saw that it was pretty interdisciplinary. It looked at education and psychology and art and science. I thought, oh, it combines all these things that I really love. So I decided to apply to school, and I did at 17. And I got accepted on a waiting list. So I had a year or so, and I thought, I want to do something really valuable with this year. And I had already trained as a nurse's aide and been a teacher's aide. So I took a position in a residential school for children and youth who were deaf and challenged in terms of their behaviors and had a difficult time participating in the sort of standard classroom of the day. So I'm going to share this first story about a boy that I'm going to call Edward. I have changed some of the details here so that you can get the gist of this story without my not being confidential. And so I became a teacher's aide in a classroom where I got to spend a year with, I call my buddy Edward. And because I was a teacher's aide, I wasn't in charge of designing anything. You know, there were teachers and there were psychologists and all kinds of people sort of weighing in on what they thought was making this young man tick. And Edward had some really interesting behaviors. He was a very energetic guy, and he knew a little bit of sign language, but not very much, which was about my speed. And he had a lot of difficulty with just getting through the day in ways that other people would have said were acceptable. He was okay for himself. So one of Edward's behaviors was that he would lick, when he got anxious, he would lick his cheeks like all the way up to here. And because we lived in a very windy, cold area, the wind would blow and his cheeks would get raw. And so then the staff said, when his cheeks get raw, you have to put cream on them. So we would put cream on his cheeks, and then he would take the cream and pull it off and lick it. So then the staff said, well, when he eats things that are not edible, he needs to brush his teeth with Listerine. So you can already tell this is a story from a long time ago, and the emphasis of this classroom was sort of reward and punishment. And Edward was not getting very many rewards. So sometimes I spent a weekend with him going through this whole cycle. And finally, one day I thought, you know, why is he licking his cheeks? It seems like he licks his cheeks when he's anxious. And what does he like to do that helps him not be anxious? So one of the things that he liked to do was to ride a bike. So I discovered that whenever Edward started to get anxious, we would just go ride a stationary bike. And then there would be no licking, there would be no cream, there would be no Listerine. He would be able to just go on with what he needed to do. So when I shared this with the classroom of the time, they were like, oh, no, 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 no. You're rewarding his behavior by giving him a bike ride. So at this point, I realized that this type of program was not for me. What I really learned from Edward was that there's all kinds of complex reasons for behaviors. And if we understand what people's needs are and we meet those needs, then we can move ahead more positively than if we're in a constant struggle trying to eliminate things that are there because our needs aren't met. It seems kind of simple. But it didn't obviously seem simple to the people in the classroom at that time. This stood me in great stead when I became an OT, because I really feel like what I learned at that point is that we need to be like detectives when it comes to human behavior, whether that's our own or somebody else's. We need to go, what is really going on here? And what's the critical thing that could make a difference? Now, science supports what I did, like exercise is great for anxiety, and meeting one's sensory needs helps with behavior. But there wasn't a lot of that information around at the time. So I got to learn it from my clients. So fast forward about a year later, and I started school as in the occupational therapy program. And this was an undergraduate program at the time. And while I was in school, I got invited to take care of a woman who was a friend of our family's. She was in her 70s, and she had been a very independent world traveler. She worked on community development all over the world until she had a stroke. And so she needed someone in her home part-time to help with things around the home and to help her, and thought, okay, this might work well for me because I was a good friend of the family. And so I accepted that position. And I was kind of full of myself, really, because I was in school as a OT my first year, and I was learning, okay, all the things I can do to help people be independent. And I made that my mission. We'll call my friend of the family Catherine. And so Catherine, because she had a little bit of challenge speaking, but mostly she had challenge using one side of her body, she was having difficulty with things like bathing and dressing. And me, as a sort of budding OT, I was like, I'm going to show her how to do all this. But I never actually asked her if that's what she wanted. I just kind of went ahead. And she didn't really say to me, don't do this. And I guess I wasn't like really reading her very well until I took her to one of her occupational therapy appointments, where there was a real occupational therapist seeing her. And I listened to her tell the therapist exactly what the therapist wanted to hear. And I'm thinking, she doesn't do that at home. That's not how it goes. And then I watched her do a puzzle, but it was a puzzle for children. And when we came home, she told me how offended she was by that, but she hadn't said anything. So it started to click to me that, she's not going to tell me, she's not really advocating for herself. She's doing what her doctors and therapists tell her. So what is it that she really wants? So when we had a discussion about that, she said, it's not important to me to be able to dress myself anymore or to be, independent in a bathtub if it takes all my energy and I don't have time for the things that I love. And what I really want to do is I want to help to write letters to all these people that I've visited around the world. And I want to make phone calls, and I want to still be a part of their life. this was a huge lesson for me, because not only was I in a profession was all about independence, but we're sort of in a society like that. And what I learned is that there's a great value to interdependence, and that what's most important is what's meaningful to us. And if we only have so much time and so much energy, then let's have a choice about what it is we want to do. And if that means that there's other things we don't do or we need help with, that's okay. And that needs to be okay for me as a therapist. And I shouldn't be assuming anything. I should be asking up front and helping people to advocate for themselves. So that was a huge lesson right off the bat at the beginning of school. I'm going to fast forward a little bit. I had many years of working in the field in all different states and different institutions like hospitals and home health. And I spent the bulk of my last 20 years working as an occupational therapist in a clinic settings. And I had my own clinic, and it was specialized for young children and youth who had challenges with sensory processing and anxiety. There were some of my clients who were autistic individuals, the whole big picture of wonderful people to learn things from. So this other story I'm going to share is about a 4-year-old, and I'm going to call her Sarah. And one of the things that Sarah taught me is that even at 4 years old, you can be exceptionally creative. You can find in yourself some strength and some resilience if you're given the space to do that. And you can kind of solve some of your own difficulties when you're given that freedom. So Sarah came to see me because she was very anxious, very bright, but just too afraid to interact with other children. So going to school was difficult. She was afraid of movement, just simply doing things like going down a slide or sitting on a swing were very challenging. And at the same time, she was kind of a perfectionist. She knew she wasn't doing these things, and that made her feel really bad. Slowly, in our clinic space, using play, we began to tackle like all those feelings that she had in a safe way. So she could move just a little bit, or she could pretend she was somebody else trying something. It was an amazing process to watch because I felt like I was there to guide, but she was really kind of seeking those resources in herself. So one of the things we did is she was scared of swinging, and I had this flat swing. We started off sitting on the floor with it and pretending we were in a boat. And then slowly, with her permission, we would bring it up an inch or two so it would rock a little bit. Then we created this game, like, what kind of weather do we have? Is it like a gentle rocking? Is it like a medium rocking? Are we in a big storm? And she would get to decide on her own, like how much movement she wanted. And this allowed her to slowly get comfortable. Well, suddenly in this boat that we were on, lots of stuffed animals appeared around, and they were in the water. And mostly at first, they were very scary animals. And she would pretend like that they were going to knock the boat and get very nervous about this. But then there were a few out there like dolphins and things like that we said, what if they just want to come for a ride? So slowly she would bring a animal up and put them on the boat and then rock a little bit and then decide if she wanted to throw them out if they weren't behaving as she expected. And she developed this big range of animals that she would allow on and things that she would do with them. And the animals had their own stories, like, oh, one of them really wasn't so scary. He just wanted to get on the boat because he was lonely. So she invented these reasons that they would be acceptable to her, that she could understand them. Round about the same time, she was having nightmares quite frequently, and one of her nightmares was spiders. So after maybe about a month of doing this kind of play with animals in part of every session, she came to me and she said, I dreamt about the spiders last night. And I said, was it scary? And she said, no, I decided to make them my friend, which is what she had been doing with her animals. And after that, as far as I know, she had no more spider dreams. Well, I share this because this is something I could never have engineered. I could be there to be responsive and help her structure her play and ask questions and help her navigate her feelings about them. But all this work was work that she was doing. And the lovely tale about this story is that within about a year or so, she was in school and enjoying it. And also she was able to tell people when something was enough and that she wasn't going to do it. And she was respected for that. So that, I think, was a huge lesson about the resilience of people. And it intertwines a little bit with my own personal story, because while I was seeing her, I was in my own life going through lots of memories that I had from being a 4-year-old. And some of them weren't easy memories. But working with her was, in a way, healing for me, because I was so inspired by her courage in challenging herself and working through the things she needed to look at. And it actually inspired me to do the same thing for myself. So these are only some of the many, many stories of the ways I've grown from working with people. As you can see, I'm still at it after all these years because I love it. And shortly around the time of COVID, I closed my clinic and I started to do more online consulting because that was what was required at the time. But I was more oriented towards helping parents who were struggling with young children or helping young adults. And so that's the direction that I've moved in the last 5 years. I have what I call the sheltering branch coaching. And I'm calling it coaching more than therapy because to me, coaching captures that there's an interaction between people. It's not about something I'm doing to someone. It's about a journey that we take together towards the things that are most meaningful. And that journey looks different for every person because every person has their own unique personality and skills and challenges. My goal is to support people in discovering kind of what are their strengths and how to navigate those challenges. So, as I said before, they can do the things that are most meaningful to them. And that involves some of that detective work, both for themselves, because we don't always know what's the most meaningful to us in every moment, but we can discover that. And also for myself in like, how do I understand someone else and they understand me, and how do we support each other in the growth that needs to happen? So I call myself an occupational therapist and a coach. And this last few years, I've been working more with youth and adults. And I do some classes on certain skills combined with coaching. So I do classes on emotional intelligence and sensory regulation and help people look at their own systems and how they operate. I do classes on executive function, in other words, brain hacks. How do we organize ourselves to get done what we need to and want to get done in life? And a lot on stress, because I think people are finding they live in stressful times, and that stress magnifies all the difficulties that we have and make it more difficult for us to function. So those have become passions of mine, along with I studied integrative health. So I really look at how does the body and mind and spirit all work together. And so I have that focus in my coaching practice for groups or individuals. And then I also worked with a company called Unitas Therapy Intelligence, and have designed a platform for therapists and educators who are working in schools or clinic situations to kind of assess and track the progress of people, set goals, and look at treatment, because in those settings, oftentimes there's requirements that we have for insurance companies and ways of reporting. So it's still consistent with my belief that we need to engage the people that we're working with in what their goals are, and make things meaningful to them. It's just a platform that allows therapists to do that so that they can go ahead and get those things done fairly quickly when it comes to documentation and get to what they really want to do, which is hang out with their clients. And that was the other thing I discovered about running a clinic practice, which is when you have to spend all your time doing paperwork, either for a clinic or in a school system, it limits the direct time that you have with people. And that's what makes me thrive, working directly with people. And I think that's the case for most therapists. And that's what most people who come to engage with someone because they want to change, they want to have that interaction too. They're not really caring so much about the pieces of paperwork. So that's been my adventure over the last 5 years. It's kind of transforming as it goes. And so I'm hoping to, and I'm going through the learning skills of like, how do you do things online and in these communities of practice and engagement. And so that's the nice, exciting adventure for me. So it's kind of like 40 years ago, I started this thinking, I don't know, am I going to be able to live with this for 2 years or 5 years? Or I can always change what I'm doing if I get bored. I've never, ever been bored. I love learning, and I love what I learn from my clients every day. And so I'm just keeping on, keeping on. So it's been very delightful to be here with you. And please go ahead and contact me if you're interested in having a more discussion, or if you have some feedback or comments or things you've learned that you want to share, that would be great too. Thank you very much.